We're going to, okay, fine. I'll just say continue. We're going to learn about some of the plants that are native to our region and a bit about their ecological niches and interconnections and how they can enhance home gardens and balconies. Our guest speaker is the owner of a small nursery in Port Coquitlam, which specializes in growing and selling native plants. And Josh started this nursery just last June, I think he told me, not very long ago, in the hope of making plants more accessible to gardeners and thereby supporting our local pollinators and other wildlife. So please join me in welcoming Josh Thompson.
Hello, everybody. I'll just share my screen here. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
All right, perfect.
Yes.
The right-hand side is blocked.
Oh, sorry, it's 1 sec.
You're not on mute.
Great.
Oh, there we go. Sorry, screen did something weird there. Oh, and can everyone see my screen all good now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, like Victoria said, I just started up my small nursery last June up in Port Coquitlam, trying to make these plants more accessible and also educate people about why they're so important to our environment and are really important to helping our pollinators and really all the life around us. So first of all, what is a native plant exactly? This is a question I get a lot. Native plant is a naturally occurring species to a given area. So what's native here is going to be different to what's native in Saskatchewan, for example. And as a result of growing in that same area for thousands and thousands of years, they've created many ecological connections over that time to many insects that have adapted to them and rely on them. So these plants have a lot more connections to life around us than ornamental or plants from different countries or continents. Well, like I said, or on the same topic of what I said, all plants are made up of chemicals. As living things that are rooted in place and can't move, these are defense mechanisms to things that would eat them. This is what makes some plants toxic to us, but okay for other things to eat. And as a result, the majority of insects are adapted to very specific chemical compositions. So about 90% of insects are what are called specialists, meaning they have really specific food sources, which can be as little as one specific plant or it can be multiple plants as well. So about 90% of those insects are adapted to specific plants. So when you're not planting native plants, you're losing out on a lot of biodiversity. And this brings me to what a generalist is versus a specialist. Generalists are things like bumblebees, honeybees, flies, the things we typically see in our gardens all the time. They have very wide floral preferences and can adapt to a lot of different plants. Whereas specialists, that 90% number I said before, have a very limited food source. Sometimes it can be one plant or a group of plants that are closely related. A good example of this would be the monarch butterfly, which many of us know relies on milkweed species. As well as there's many bees that are specialists as well. But for them, they're not feeding on the foliage, of course. They're feeding on different pollen or nectar sources. And for them, it's a little different, where many of them are going to have specialized mouth parts that only fit with certain flowers and vice versa. So if you lose that one pollinator or that one flower, you're also losing the other as well. And a little note, host plants and butterflies. Many of us might not be familiar with what a host plant is, but host plants refer to butterflies and moths. They all have really specific species, plant species their caterpillars rely on for food. So the adults can be thought of as generalists. They have these long proboscis. They're able to access nectar from a lot of different flowers. But the reason butterflies are declining so much is because they can't find host plants, which are the plants their caterpillars need to eat and rely on for food. So a lot of the big host plants are a lot of our native tree species. These are some of the species that host hundreds of different species of both butterflies, moths, and beetle larvae. So things like crabapple, cottonwood, oaks, cherry, maple, birch, lots of things like that. And I've left a note on the bottom. So butterflies are currently declining about 2% each year, which is yikes.
Yeah.
Oh, some of the benefits of native plants. They're low maintenance, they're adapted to our climate. They've been growing here for thousands of years by themselves with no one fertilizing them or watering them. They support pollinators, birds, wildlife in the form of seeds, cones, berries, pollen, nectar, all sorts of things. Also nesting material in a lot of cases. They're hardy, disease-resistant, drought-tolerant once established. And they handle lots of slopes and grades and different soil conditions, such as conditions that are acidic. And many of them are adapted to various amounts of light and cost-effective because they are mostly perennial. So they're coming back each year. There's a few that are annual, but they also are self-seeding as well. So our main rainforest, or our main ecosystem along the coast, is a coastal temperate rainforest. This comes with a few things. Many of our plants have a lot of cover from the canopy above, which means they're adapted to a lot of varying lighting conditions, from shade up to full sun in certain cases. Most of them are perennial, and they're adapted to our local soil and weather conditions, such as acidity and our winters and all that kind of stuff. We also have another ecosystem along the coast called the Garry Oak ecosystem, which is mainly on the island and a little bit lower down on the coast from where we are. But many of the plants that grow there also grew historically throughout our areas along the coast, just not as grouped together in one area. So I'm going to go over a lot of the different plants we have here, and I'm including their lighting conditions they prefer, as well as soil. So this is kind of just what I mean when I say different lighting conditions, where shade is 0 to 2 hours, part shade is 2 to 4, part sun 4 to 6, and full sun is 6 plus. So our first plant I'm going to show you guys, it's a popular one, it's the Pacific Bleeding Heart. It can do full shade up to part sun and likes moist soil generally. It blooms early spring and for quite a long time. This makes it an important source of nectar early in the season when bees are just becoming active and resources can still be quite scarce. Bumblebees and hummingbirds are the ones feeding on it generally, and it's a host plant for the Clodius parnassian butterfly. It can spread quite quickly and act as a ground cover as well. It's great for shady areas. And here I have a close-up of the flowers, as well as the Clodius parnassian butterfly, which will only lay its eggs on bleeding hearts. Another.
Before we go on to the next one, I've got some of those, and I'm wondering about collecting the seeds. And got any tips for that? Do we have to wait
like how to grow them, or just collecting them?
I'm just collecting them, and I'm thinking maybe there's a place in the forest I could sprinkle them around. Got any tips for that?
Well, you just want to wait till the seed capsules, like you can kind of bend them a little bit and they'll just break open if they're ready and the seeds are formed, and they're just like small black seeds. That's what it will look like. But you'll want to plant them right away. If you store them and they dry out, they'll actually won't be viable.
Okay, good tip. Thanks.
Interesting, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Second plant here is called candy flower. It's also known as Siberian miner's lettuce. It grows in very similar conditions to bleeding hearts. It can do moist soils. It can do full shade up to part sun. And you can actually eat the leaves and flowers. It's actually in bloom right now. If you go on any forest hikes, you can keep your eye out for this one. And it's visited by very small bees, very tiny bees, mining bees and sweat bees. Although occasionally you'll see bigger bees visited as well. It is an annual, but it can be quite aggressive with how much it can reseed itself each year. Like you can start with 3 and the next year you'll have dozens of them all over the place. So be careful if you have open space you're planting it in. It's also a very early bloomer. It can bloom as early as February and lasts quite a while. And there's a picture of it. It's quite a lot of flowers, can be quite clustered there. Another plant many of us might be familiar with is Pacific Trillium, like shade to part shade of moist soils. The flowers are quite interesting because they'll actually, once they're done blooming, they'll fade to a pinky color. And because they actually do not create any nectar, meaning the things that are visiting it, pollinators, are specifically looking for that pollen source, which would be bees and beetles are the primary pollinator, since they're the only ones that are specifically looking for pollen. When other things pollinate flowers, it's because they're looking for that nectar source, and the pollen rubs up on their bodies and they kind of just move it around by happenstance. They take many years to grow from seed. If you plant seeds, you're looking at probably minimum 4 years before that plant will flower, and that's quite that happens to it with a lot of our plants, especially the native lily species we have here. And there's a picture of it. You can see it fading to pink. These 3 plants have one thing in common, and that's that their seeds are actually spread and collected by ants. If you were to open up the little seed capsule of, say, the bleeding heart, you'll notice the individual black seeds each have a small white appendage on them called an elaiosome. And that little white appendage is full of proteins and fats that the ants will collect to feed to their brood, their babies. And then they'll just discard the seed because the seed itself is useless to them, which they discard it underground in their nest, which ends up being a perfect growing spot for a lot of these species. It's quite an interesting relationship.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I didn't know trilliums did that too. We're spread by ants. That's interesting.
Red columbine's a very beautiful one. Any flower that's red is or I shouldn't say any, but oftentimes that's a signifier that it's a big hummingbird magnet, especially if they're drooping and have a lot of that pollen. It signals to hummingbirds that it's a strong nectar source with a lot of nutrients for them. This is a short-lived perennial. They like part shade up to full sun, but if you do have them in full sun, then you need to keep them moist so they don't dry out. And it's favored by hummingbirds, but it's also visited by bumblebees as well as hoverflies. And the seeds are eaten by birds like sparrows, juncos, and finches. Goat's beard, this is a really cool one, and I call it a pollinator magnet because all sorts of things will visit this, from bees to beetles to flies to wasps. Lots of things will visit it. Likes to moist soils as well, has some shady areas up to part sun or full sun again if you keep it moist. There's a couple other pictures of it, and on the right, if you look closely, you can see some small beetles and flies in there. Very small flowers. A lot of our flowers have these clusters of white flowers, and those seem to be very attractive to a lot of beetles. On that note, false Solomon seal is another one mainly visited by beetles, but also small bees. It's great for shady areas up to part sun, and it'll even do areas with dry shade as well. Flowers are fragrant, and they actually turn into berries later in the season that birds will eat as well. Now, stinging nettle. This is one of my favorite ones to talk about. Everyone thinks I'm crazy for growing and trying to sell this to people, but it is actually an extremely beneficial plant. It is good for a ton of different species, especially butterflies, and it attracts ladybugs as well. The flowers aren't very showy because they're wind pollinated, but do be warned that in sunny areas it can be quite aggressive. It is also essential habitat for the Oregon forest snail, which is an endangered species of snail in BC. And the leaves are edible, and some people will cook them and use them as a alternative to spinach and things like that. And here are about 5 of our local butterflies that actually lay their eggs on stinging nettle and rely on it.
Oh,
So a lot of beautiful butterflies need it.
At Josh's, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep. At Josh's nursery, he does sell stinging nettle. I can vouch for this. And he does have a sign, do not touch. But funnily enough, right beside it or very close by was some Devil's Club. And there was no sign on that, do not touch. So I thought that was kind of funny.
Well, yeah, well, the Devil's Club is just a small ouch right away, whereas the stinging nettle is prolonged.
Oh,
So
Yeah.
oh, it's good to know.
Yeah.
Can these butterflies be introduced?
Generally, you don't want to introduce things like butterflies and bees just because depending on where you get them from, a lot of butterfly farms and stuff like that, the genetics of the butterflies they're farming aren't very good, or they can spread disease to the actual wild populations. And a lot of these butterflies are also migratory too. So they start up in the US and come down here. And studies tend to show that raising migratory butterflies in captivity and releasing them, they don't migrate properly after that. So, and it's also a matter of you don't want to introduce more individuals to an ecosystem that's already stressed. It's better to increase and improve the habitat.
Right. So it's providing them with the stinging nettle, and then they might come and help themselves.
Yeah, and lay their eggs and stuff like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, woolly sunflower, this is a really cool one. It's very drought tolerant and attracts a lot of different bee species, especially a lot of solitary specialist bees. And it provides nectar, a nectar source for butterflies as well, and tends to like full sun conditions. That Canada goldenrod, this is a pretty high impact plant. A lot of our high impact plants are big things like shrubs or trees, but for its size, it does a lot. There's dozens of different Lepidoptera that will lay their eggs on it, which are the family that consists of butterflies and moths. It will grow in most soil conditions. It really is kind of a weed, but it's extremely beneficial as it blooms. It's one of the last plants to bloom in each year. So when food sources are quite scarce, it's one of the few things still blooming while pollinators are trying to collect the last amount of resources before winter. Yeah, it's great for butterflies. Lots of moths use it as a host plant. Lots of bees use it to collect nectar. And if you're like me, where you're going out into your garden at night with a headlamp, you'll see tons of moths all over it too. So quite a good plant. Got nodding onion. This is another one that would typically grow in the Garry Oak ecosystem or open sunnier areas. It does part shade to full sun and generally likes dry or moist soils, but will handle a lot of different soil conditions. It's quite hardy, and it's visited by hummingbirds and bees generally. Douglas Aster, this plant makes a lot of these small blue daisies you'll see in late summer to fall. It's another late bloomer, so it's a valuable one. It'll grow in most soils, just like goldenrod. And it's liked as a food source by both bees and butterflies, especially those what are called skippers, which are those small orange butterflies you tend to see in the summer or late summer. Quite like this one as a food source. It has quite a long bloom time, and the seeds are fed on by songbirds. Large-leaved lupine, another one of these species that like full sun and can be a bit aggressive and with reseeding itself and spreading out. But it's liked by a lot of different things, bees, butterflies, and hummingbirds, and it's a host plant for different butterflies as well.
Okay.
And lupine is part of the pea family, or Fabaceae, and a characteristic of this family is they actually restore nitrogen to the soil, a lot of these plants. And just like Douglas Aster, the seeds are eaten by various songbirds. Common Camas. This was really one of the main plants in the Garry Oak ecosystem, if not the main plant. It was very widespread and used as a food source traditionally as for the First Nations. It's a pollinator magnet and is an extremely beneficial plant. It's also part of the lily family, so it takes at least 4 years really before you'll see it flower as well. Western Yarrow, this is another pretty prolific one. It likes part sun to full sun, but it spreads and grows quite quickly, but it attracts a large diversity of pollinators, flies, beetles, bees, small wasps, that all try to feed on it for the pollen and such it produces. Another hardy and drought tolerant one. It's extremely long blooming. It blooms around June and will bloom all the way through the summer. A Pearly Everlasting. This is another great summer plant. Does well in sun, drought tolerant conditions. It's a summer food source for bees, and it's also a host plant, and seed heads are eaten by songbirds like a lot of these plants. And if you look closely, you'll see there's actually a spider in that picture, just almost perfectly disguised, chomping on that bee. And that's a crab spider, so it's one of those benefits of having these native plants is you're attracting more life and you get to see a lot more of these connections and relationships. Woodland Strawberry. We have a few different native strawberry plants and they all make these tiny strawberries, but they are extremely tasty. They're liked by a lot of different birds like robins, towhees, grosbeaks, waxwings. Likes moist to well-drained soils and will do part shade to full sun even. And a lot of our strawberry plants are pollinated primarily by really small bees, like sweat bees and mining bees. A lot of bees you wouldn't generally think of as bees if you just saw them quickly and didn't look closely at them. Redwood Sorrel. I include this one mainly because it's a great ground cover for dry, shady areas and acidic soils. Pollinated by small bees and flies, likes moist soil. Bunchberry, another one, like similar conditions to Redwood Sorrel. It won't tolerate harsh late day sun though, is the one thing with it. So you want to make sure to protect it from that. And will spread out about a foot or so. It's not the most quickest growing ground cover, but if you plant enough of them, it will kind of grow all together and make a nice mat of these white flowers. Mainly pollinated by small bees, beetles, and flies. And these, like the name would imply, these flowers turn into bunches of berries late in the summer, fed on by different birds. This one's called Drops of Gold. They tend to like shade or part shade conditions, moist acidic soils, and they're mainly visited by bumblebees. They also just make these orange berries in the summer that are eaten by various birds as well. And there's just a close-up of the flowers there.
I know those as fairy bells.
So it's just what I was going to say. Yeah, they've got or hookers fairy bells.
Yeah.
That's another name for it. I call it Drops of Gold for presentation because a lot of people question me when I call it hooker. So,
of course.
But Hooker is actually an 18th century botanist.
Yes.
For FYI. So.
Of course.
We got False Lily of the Valley. This is one you'll see right now if you go on your forest walks. It's like a big green mat across the forest floor. Makes these very small, fragrant white flowers that turn to berries basically at the very end of summer. So, and these berries will actually persist into winter, making them a winter food source for birds, like a few of our native plants will do. Tends to like moist or even wetter soils, and it's pollinated by small flies, beetles, and bees. I'm gonna go over some shrubs and trees now. A lot of these are quite important to what's called the nectar flow, which basically describes the transition of floral resources throughout the season. So as one thing blooms, another thing is transitioning into bloom, and there's a constant flow of resources. So a lot of these are very important because they bloom quite early in the year and have a concentrated amount of a lot of flowers all in one place. And on that note, I've put Indian plum first here. This is basically the first or one of the first flowers that blooms each year. And it's really important for queen bumblebees that are just waking up from hibernation or dormancy. Queen bumblebees can be active in the season as early as February if conditions are right. So a lot of these plants are the first food sources available. It's also a good one for hummingbirds as well. And it makes small berries eaten by birds and mammals late in the season. Not the most tasty, I've tried it. Salmonberry, another one, usually blooms shortly after Indian plum. And bees and hummingbirds seem to quite enjoy salmonberry flowers. They'll do part shade or part sun, and they like that moist soil, often growing along riverbanks and things like that. And it's the first flower to really turn into berries in the season. So it's one of the first berry and fruit food sources for things like bears and birds. It will spread out and turn into a bit of a thicket if not managed, though.
Mhm.
Oregon grape, another early blooming one. The leaves look a bit like holly, but they don't hurt you as much if you touch them. So this plant will do shade up to even full sun, but generally prefers it a bit more on the shady side. Blooms fairly early spring, visited by birds, hummingbirds, butterflies, and bees, and it's also a host plant. The leaves are evergreen, and it makes edible kind of sour berries that are fed on by various birds as well. And if you notice there, I have two different Latins. I have the Mahonia aquifolium and Mahonia nervosa. The aquifolium is a taller version of Oregon grape, and the nervosa is a smaller version that only gets to about 3 feet or so tall. A red flowering currant. Like I said with the red columbine, this is another big hummingbird magnet. And what's interesting is this genus, which includes a lot of different currants and gooseberries, has co-evolved with hummingbirds to be one of the first plants opening and providing a really good food source for them when they migrate here in the early spring. Tend to like moist or well-drained soils. And a lot of bees also like them, as well as many things in the genus Ribes are also a host plant to a lot of different Lepidoptera. Yeah, coastal willow, also known as hooker's willow.
Uh-oh. We're all adults, Josh. Here. Anyway, don't worry.
Well, you'd be surprised. So this is another pretty high impact plant. Has hundreds of species of moths and butterflies that use it as a host plant. A lot of showy's butterflies as well. Will do part to full sun and provides an early source of pollen for early season bees as well. And we have quite a few different native willows here. But one of our most common willows you see is the weeping willow, but it's actually native to China. And as part of that, it's actually not very useful for insects here. Pacific rhododendron. This is our native rhododendron species. Looks very similar to most rhododendrons, but most of the ones you see around mass plantings of them are species that are native to Europe or Asia. And rhododendrons are pretty interesting. Their nectar is actually toxic to most bees, but bumblebees specifically make an enzyme that lets them process it without having any negative effects from it. So they are the main ones you'll see pollinating them and visiting them. So it's quite interesting when you see those relationships with bees and plants and things, where the plant gets basically for sure pollination and the bees get that for sure nutrients from that plant. Our native rhododendrons are quite slow growing though, and they like shadier conditions than most of our non-native rhododendrons we see. Got Salal, which is another quite prolific one. It's quite hardy as well, which is why you see it used quite a lot in landscaping. This one will do shade of full sun, like some moist, dry, or acidic soils. Can put up with a lot. Once it's established in place, it will spread quite quickly. But in shady spots, it will act as more of a low-growing ground cover. In sunnier areas, it will get a bit taller. This plant's visited by bees, hummingbirds. It's a host plant for a species of butterfly, and it also makes edible berries that are good for humans as well as birds. Got red huckleberry, but we have quite a few different species of huckleberry and also related plants in the genus Vaccinium. These plants are related or do really well in a lot of acidic conditions. They're visited by bees, sometimes hummingbirds, and they're quite slow growing, but most of them are also host plants to different butterflies and moths as well. Red elderberry have these big white clusters again that are attracted to beetles. They're also fragrant. They almost have a bit of a citrus smell to them. And they're a bit of an understory tree, but they get quite tall. And they like moist acidic soils usually, mainly pollinated by beetles, but small bees will visit them as well. The red berries are actually toxic to us, but certain birds will eat them. We have a couple different species of roses as well. This is Baldhip Rose, which is a species that tends to like shadier conditions. Up to likes part shade is the best results for it. We'll do moist, well-drained soils. And roses are a really good one for bees. A lot of these species with big open flowers provide a lot of pollen, so they're very attractive to bees. On the other note, we have Nootka Rose, which is a rose that likes sunnier conditions. Moist, well-drained, bees and beetles will visit it. And a lot of things in the genus Rosa are also used as host plants.
Lovely.
Devil's Club, everyone's favorite. These ones will go shade, even part sun, but they like a lot of moisture as well. The flowers are really liked by ants, I've noticed this year, as well as small beetles, bees, flies, all the regulars. Berries are actually loved by bears. They're a favorite by bears. And it acts as a great specimen plant or a conversation starter if you want one in your garden.
Do you sell many of them, Josh?
I've bought one that I'm trying to still resell.
Right.
So no, but one day I know someone will.
Okay.
I mostly bought it because I thought it was really cool. So
Yeah.
Mock orange. This is a great nectar plant for butterflies and bees. They get quite large, but they like part shade to full sun. And they have fragrant white flowers.
When you say quite tall, how tall is that?
I'm not sure the exact number offhand, but usually around like 20, 25 feet or so. Ocean spray. This is a nicer, like more well-behaved shrub. It'll grow around 9 to 12 feet tall with these big clusters of these white flowers. It's really attracted to a lot of bees, beetles, flies, butterflies even. And it's a host plant for butterflies such as the Western Azure. Tends to like full sun and will do dry or moist soil once established. And this is a close-up of the flowers.
Well, she was tickled that she noticed her. She thought that was really neat.
Thimbleberry. This guy will do part shade to full sun, makes edible berries. Just like the rose, it has these big open flowers that are liked by bees, beetles, and it's host plant for different butterflies. And I tell a lot of people nowadays, the one benefit of this plant is if we ever have another pandemic, you can use it as toilet paper. So there's my one joke of the.
Unlike the Devil's Club.
It is the Devil's Club. Red-twig Dogwood, another shrub, likes moist to wet soils and attracts a lot of different bee species, which is interesting. Bumblebees and honeybees are our main bees you see, but they actually don't seem to like the flowers of this one very much. Instead, you see a lot of smaller bees visit it. So it's quite interesting to watch. Of Garry Oak. like you may remember, I mentioned Garry Oak ecosystem earlier, and this was a managed ecosystem by the First Nations people, where they would do controlled burns to get rid of a lot of the woody plants and material that were growing up through the meadow area to preserve the camas as their food source. And as a result, a lot of the only trees that would survive those controlled burns were the big oak trees that were established in the meadows because of their bark. These guys like full sun and dry, well-drained soils. And oak trees are one of the most beneficial trees you can plant. Generally, if you're planting a native oak, there's hundreds of different species that rely on it to host. Bitter cherry, another high impact one that has hundreds of Lepidoptera that will host on it. Part shade, part sun, moist conditions, big food source for bees and butterflies. And the berries are eaten by quite a few different birds I've listed here. Grouse, band-tailed pigeons, flickers, jays, robins, lots of different birds. Berries are edible, but like the name says, they taste extremely bitter, so. And Pacific crabapple, one of our last high impact plants here. They'll do part to full sun. They like moist to wet soils. And again, host plant for hundreds of different species of Lepidoptera. Early in the season, it's an important food source for bees. And the small fruits are eaten by tons of different birds and mammals. But an interesting to note is that a lot of birds won't eat the fruits of hybridized crab apples or cultivars. So having the native species can make quite a difference. All those little changes in genetics can make a big difference towards if something's going to feed on it still or not, especially with insects.
Amazing.
So coming to the end of my presentation here, I have a few different design considerations for pollinators in wildlife you can use. So not disturbing your soil until around May, if possible, is really good. A lot of things are nesting under the soil and in the ground. And around May, when temperatures are high enough, a lot of those are insects and things have come out of dormancy and are active. So you don't have to worry about killing them when you dig up your garden. Planting in groups of 3+ of the same plant, especially for like smaller herbaceous ground covers and stuff like that, because this will make a much bigger signal and will be far more attractive to pollinators. When you only have like a single plant in an area, a bee will probably just visit it and oftentimes just fly away because it's not worth their time or energy to stop at a single plant. So a group of plants give you a lot more success. Providing bloom succession is one of the biggest things, and this means providing a constant rate of flowers from early spring all the way to late fall. So you want to have something constantly in bloom the entire time. That way you're helping the bees, like bumblebees, that are active all the time throughout that whole season, as well as different species that are only active for part of the season. You always have some sort of resources around for them to use. And one of the last things is provide nesting / overwintering habitat. This comes in the form of things like leaves, stems, and other organic natural material. So just leaving a pile of your leaves in your yard on top of your garden can create a lot of habitat for insects to overwinter under the leaves. Birds will also go through these piles of leaves in the winter looking for insects to feed on. So it acts as a valuable food source that way as well. And also just leaving a lot of your stems and things intact and cutting off the seed heads. You can cut them from about 1 foot high, and a lot of bees and stuff will actually overwinter inside those stems.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and this is just a little picture of my nursery here. It's nothing too fancy. It's mostly just outside. I have my hours on the right there, although I'll be scaling down for the summer hours pretty soon. Just another couple pictures. The right is the picture of what my greenhouse looks like most of the time. And here's a couple of resources. My website is PlanBeeNativePlants.com, and I have a lot of information on there, some of which is the stuff I'm talking about, as well as a lot of information on the plants. and I hope to be adding more useful resources as time goes on. BCNativeBees.org is the Native Bee Society of BC, which is a nonprofit group I'm a board member of as well, and they do a lot of education about native bees. A couple different books. Plants of the Pacific Northwest Coast is a great book for learning about native plants as a field guide and identification. And Bringing Nature Home is an amazing book. It's really eye-opening for just going more in depth to what I've been talking about tonight and getting a more solid grasp of how important native plants are and how impactful they can be. And I just have a few social media links of where you can find me. My website, my email, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. And that is the end of my presentation. So thank you very much. And I hope you guys enjoyed it.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, very interesting.
Well, thank you, Josh. So I'm sure you're open to some questions now.
Yeah, for sure.
So does anyone have any questions?
Do you need pots by any chance?
I can always use pots.
Okay, 'cause I've got some, and they're not. Some of them do not have the recycling symbol on the bottom, or it's so faint I can't see the darn thing. And I'm just loath to throw them in the trash.
Yeah, I can definitely use them if you come visit the nursery and drop them off or anything. I will take them.
Thanks.
So Josh, if you stopped sharing the screen, we'll be able to see people more. And just while you're doing that, Josh, if you were asked, what are the top 3 plants? If you had very limited space, but you wanted to attract bees, what would you say your top 3 plants are for a summer garden?
For a summer garden?
Yeah, like you can't, you're not going to have succession of blooms.
Well, it depends on the condition, but I would say goldenrod for sure is a great one. Douglas Aster is a really good one. But it's hard to really give a top 3 because different plants are attracting different species of bees and a lot of different things. You can't really say this plant is like the best for this exactly. There's so many different variables, but yeah, and it's also a matter of like how those plants are interacting with each other in the environment that are going to make them impactful.
That the tall Mahonia aquafolia, that is definitely a bee magnet, but it's tall. It's I don't know, 12 feet or something. The bees are way up there, but it's just almost deafening when the blossoms are in full swing there.
Yeah, it's a really good one for a lot of different things.
Susan, you had a question? Can I ask a question?
Go ahead, Susan.
One of the plants that you didn't include, and I'm wondering if there's a reason, is the foxgloves, the digitalis, because they're in showy bloom right now.
So foxglove actually is not native. It's actually native to Europe.
Oh, okay.
But it's naturalized, wouldn't you say, Josh? Here.
Well, there's kind of different categories. I include things as like it's naturalized, it grows by itself naturally, but what I would call native as like defining native is things that have been around long enough to really build those ecological connections. Whereas, things will still pollinate and bees will visit foxglove, but nothing's really feeding on the foliage. It has like a very small number of things that are able to feed on it compared to a native counterpart. Also, I see in the chat there, the red elderberries. No, the red elderberries are not edible for humans. I believe you can cook them and that makes them edible, but don't quote me on that.
I have a question, if you don't mind answering.
For sure.
My wife Stacy has always wanted to put up like a jasmine hedge around our house, but we've been told that they wouldn't make a good plant or a hedge. Is there any native flowering plants that would make a good hedge?
Oh yeah, lots of them. Red flowering currants do really well. You can make them into a hedgerow. Oregon grape you could do, and you can also like trim a lot of these plants down too if they grow taller than you want. But yeah, red flowering currant, Oregon grape. I think what else? Like, do you have an idea of how tall you want it approximately?
Well, currently our hedge that we have is probably 10 to 12 feet high, but we don't want to go that high. We probably want to have something that's about 6 to 8 feet.
Yeah, I would say red flowering currants would be a good one for that. Thimbleberry would be okay too. And
Josh, this is Christina. I'm wondering about mock orange, because we see them at Colony Farm, and you know they trim them down, and they have. If Stacy wants something fragrant, they smell so beautiful.
yeah, it's a great one.
Okay, I'll recommend that one, Christina. Thank you very much.
They
Right
do
now,
get quite large.
when you go to the garden, you know where the parking lot is at the garden, there's one right there at the entrance, and then one closer as you walk towards the garden. They're
Okay.
really lovely.
I will let her know. Thank you, Christina.
Any other questions?
I have one. We're just not familiar with Devil's Club. It sounds most intriguing and absolutely dangerous. Explain to the poor immigrants.
So what do you want to say about Devil's Club? Any hiker knows Devil's Club.
Oh yeah.
Josh.
Yeah, we know about poison ivy, but and I think we can recognize that, but Devil's Club?
I wouldn't recognize it.
No.
Yeah, Devil's Club has these giant leaves. They're even bigger than big leaf maple leaves, and they basically just have spikes all over them. It's not like particularly dangerous. It just, if you touch it, it might hurt you if you like squeeze down on it. But so to say,
Well, the canes also have very significant thorns and
yeah, like they have thorns all over the canes as well as the underside of the leaves. They have a small row of spikes on the top of the leaves, so spikes everywhere.
It's a double whammy. Yeah.
But apparently they have a lot of medicinal qualities as well.
Can you tell us what the scientific name of Devil's Club is? And I think that might answer part of the question.
Oh, I forget what it is. It's,
it was on one of your slides there.
yeah, it's something horridus.
Oplopanix horridus.
I see.
So it's the horrid part.
Yeah. Oplopanix horridus.
I think it also, you can get, after touching the leaves, some people can get a photosensitive reaction. If you're then exposed to, your hands are exposed to sunlight, you can get welts from that, like almost an immune response, but caused by.
That before, but interesting.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Yeah, I've heard that it can be a chemical irritant as well. Not nearly as bad as, say, poison ivy, or I think even, wow, brain. What's
Nettle?
Yeah, nettle. I think not as bad as that, but I have heard that. I haven't tested it myself.
Yeah.
Although I can tell you from experience that when you're slipping off a log and you reach out and grab one, it sucks. It sucks.
And it's always the one you grab.
And okay, one more question. How big is this, a shrub, a tree?
It's a shrub. So they can get a decent size. You can probably get around, I want to say around 12 feet tall, but I think they're pretty slow growing.
Oh my.
They also seem to really like very moist areas. Like you'll find them growing right next to, or sometimes even in creeks and streams.
Right next door to slippery logs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like if you're hiking through one of the swampier, low-lying forested areas, you tend to see a lot of them.
Okay. Thank you.
I was at a workshop, and they had a boy who had brushed up against it, and it was on his neck and throat, and he really suffered. And then the next summer when he was outside, it came back. And I remember just feeling really sorry for that poor kid, because he was in really bad shape. And they have these stalks and then a giant leaf. So it's almost like you could use it as an umbrella kind of thing, but it would be just devastating to touch it. So from what I remember of this poor kid, like he was 8 or 9, I think it might have been at the UBC BC Nature
Oh gosh.
meeting,
Huh.
and my heart just bled for that poor kid. They made
Lucy,
the point. I got
sorry.
it.
Yes, Lucy.
The thing to do if you get in contact with Devil's Club is to take a piece of it that doesn't have any stings and rub it on the area that's been stung, and it really works.
Right. Oh.
My daughter, I said, don't touch those plants, and of course she has to touch them. And we were doing the Barron's canoe trip, and we were far away from anything. But because I'm a homeopath, I got a piece of it and rubbed it. And a few minutes later, I said, well, how's your finger? And she said, what finger? I knew that she was fine. The Devil's Club has a really strong tradition within the native people. And they apparently, and I did a proving on this, so I got quite deep into this plant. One thing that they used to do, they used to take the branch, a thicker branch, and use those ones as club, and hence the Devil's Club, because they used to fight over it. The other thing that they used to do, they used to burn it, and when you burn it, apparently what you get is a black kind of ash, and they used to mix it with bear fat, and they used to put markings on their faces so that they were really scared. Not only that, because of the plant itself, it would give the person that had these markings some extra fighting power, because it had some kind of attributes that the plant has. So as a plant, the native people used to use it, and I don't think, and maybe they still do. It has a really long history of medicinal properties. So it's a phenomenal plant, actually.
Maybe you'll sell your one plant now. Gosh, everyone's intrigued. It's,
It's a really cool plant.
yeah. So we have time for one more question. Does anyone have another question?
I've got one.
Okay, Elaine. Yeah.
Whenever I go out to buy Indian plum, I like it in my yard because the birds love the berries. I always look for a female plant, and it's a dioecious species. And I'm wondering if the plants that you sell have been sexed.
I'm currently all out of Indian plum at the moment, but the ones I did have were sexed.
That's great. It's very unusual to find someone who does that. So I'll visit you next spring.
That sounds great.
Yeah. Yeah, Josh. Well, thank you so much for this very, very nice, for lesson in some of our native plants. And I know you couldn't possibly cover all of them, but some of the key ones anyway. And one of the things I really loved about your talk is you kept saying, well, if you go out and you look at the blooms and see what insects are on the flowers right now, I find that really inspiring and really makes me want to go out and see what's on my blooming, false lily, the valley, and red-twig dogwood. And like it's so much more interesting than just looking at the actual bloom. It's seeing what comes to it and what's feeding off it, and just even the goldenrod in fall, watching how it falls over with the heavy dried blossom, and then the little ground feeding birds that get access to the seeds, and just the wonderful interconnections between these plants and wildlife. So I see we've got one question, another question, Lucy. Yeah.
Badlia, what do you think of that? It's supposed to be called the butterfly bush, but
Yeah.
Badlia.
That's a good question.
What do I think of it?
Yep.
I think anyone that has it should burn it. It's an invasive species here, as well as a lot of places throughout North America. So even though it provides a nectar source, again, it's not providing any nesting habitat, which is really the limiting factor with butterflies. So I wouldn't really call it particularly great for butterflies. A lot of other plants are going to provide a lot higher impact.
Thank you. So
Okay.
shall I
Well-
get rid of mine?
I would support that.
They're pretty invasive. You go along the upper levels highway and you see a lot of them that have escaped going up Cypress.
And invasive species are actually the second biggest contributor to extinction, right next to this straight up habitat loss. So that is why I say that.
Yeah. It's an important time to be gardening with native plants. We can only do what we can do. And I think it's a really good time to be starting up a native plant nursery as well, Josh. I think the time has come, really. People are realizing, that we are in various types of crises, including, biodiversity crises. And it's really important, I think, to include native plants in your gardening. So thank you very, very much again, Josh.
Yeah, thank you
Great
guys
talk.
for having me. I really appreciate
great
it.
presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, thank you guys.
But don't go away. We have a special session that will go on for about 15 minutes, I think. I'm going to hand the mic over to Brian. And this is the special wildlife sightings, monthly wildlife sightings session. So stick around for this, please, Josh, and all our visitors here too.
Totally, be our guest. Thank you, Victoria. Yes, we have our monthly wildlife sightings session. So thank you everybody who submitted photos of some fabulous wildlife that they've seen. I've actually added a couple myself this time. So I'll hog the limelight at the very end. So okay, let's start. So I'll share my screen. And can everybody see my screen? Wildlife gallery, May and June. Yep. Okay, fabulous, fabulous. Okay, so let's move on. I certainly hope everybody who submitted photos is on the line tonight and they can speak to the backstory of the photo. So Ellen.
Hi, yeah. Obviously these are sandhill cranes and the two proud parents of one little chick there. And they were in Minnetonka Park, conveniently located just out in front of the viewing deck by the lodge.
Oh my word.
Right.
Wonderful.
Beautiful photo.
Oh, thank you.
Ellen?
And this is in Colony Farm by the pond there.
The duck pond.
And it's a red-winged blackbird feeding the baby.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
In the reeds there.
Good eye. That's camouflaged.
Yeah, it is. It is. Ellen, I didn't put up the other one. You sent the separate photo of the baby. I haven't got that one with me.
Okay.
Okay, but that's a fabulous shot.
That's a beautiful shot. Oh, no.
That's a good photo.
And so this, I have to thank Jeff Rudd for this photo. He pointed out the tree and the little nesting hole where this red-breasted sapsucker was going into. Yeah. And then I didn't have my camera at the time, but I did come back and he was still there burrowing out his hole. And so I managed to get a picture of him.
Yeah.
Or her.
Great. Yeah.
Very cute. Lee, is Lee on tonight?
I didn't see him.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm definitely no expert, but he says that's a black-headed grosbeak. Definitely. Good shot, as you'd expect from Lee.
Yeah.
Oh,
Also, some beautiful ospreys. Just taken last month. Evelyn.
I was taken at Colony Farm last month. I thought he was super cute.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, just a baby.
Good close up too.
Yeah. Oh,
I think it's a bullfrog.
Is it a bullfrog? And this is a cinnamon teal. Okay. that one. When he was preening himself, and we all kind of started taking a lot of pictures because it was so, couldn't believe the colors of his wing.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, that was amazing. Yeah. Oh, that's the duckling. That was at Blakeburn. Thought he was kind of cute too. And Blakeburn as well. In the dogwood tree, that was quite like that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's cute. Oh, and my tohi. All these at Colony Farm.
Yeah. We're so lucky to have that so close.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's a fabulous shot. Look at that.
Goodness.
It's on the fence?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
I saw one at a high note as well.
And finally, I got two photos. This was taken just last month from one of my feeders at home. Little hummingbird.
Yeah.
He got his tongue stuck out. He's obviously about to or just finished feeding.
Oh, wow.
This was taken actually last year. This was taken a year ago. But it was too good not to share again. Just love the colors. Just beautiful.
Great action shot.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I put it on motor drive, and there's no expertise there. It's more luck. It just click, 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 click. And that's it. That's it. For all our photos. Right. Do we have any other wildlife sightings that we don't have photos for? Has anyone seen anything recently that of note that they'd like to share?
Oh, at the lagoons last night, and saw what, three or four nighthawks.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I didn't know quite what they were at first, and
I got a photograph of them, and sure enough, they have the wings and everything that identified them.
And then I was telling John this afternoon that one of the people we meet on a fairly regular basis at the lagoons, a young man called Ming, has told us that he has heard the bunting in the field on Fremont and has seen them. So that's our next plan, is to go along and see if we can spot a bunting close to home.
That's really.
Yeah.
Okay. That's near the wetland there, behind.
No, just basically the open field.
In the golf course and.
Yeah, just.
Oh wow!
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, report back.
Yes, that's purely hearsay at the moment.
Yeah.
I think he had a photograph, didn't he?
Yeah. Well.
Then you are tasked to prove or disprove.
We have.
We'll try.
Yeah. Please report back next month. Also, just on birds, I wanted to say that at the invasive pool at Como Lake yesterday, which Kathy and Laurie orchestrated, had a fabulous time. We were there for a couple of hours, and I had the battle scars to prove that I pulled a bit of blackberry. I was working with a new young lady, Katie, who is from the East Coast, that she is terribly keen to join an environmental or ecological organization here. And of course, I talked up BMN incessantly. And she's a birder from the East Coast, so she's very familiar with birds from there, but she wants to know more about the birds of the West Coast. So I think she'll probably join the group, and so she'll be both a teacher and a learner for the group for both coasts. Lovely young lady, and I certainly hope she joins the group. So, yep. So any more sightings?
I just want to say that I was tickled pink to see 8 or 9 swallows zipping around the fields at Glen Eyre and Elementary, because they have been missing in action for many years. And a group of students were walking down the sidewalk and they stopped and looked at the birds, and I was out there putzing around. So we had a very nice conversation about these swallows that were just swooping down. It was just glorious to see, and even more glorious to have some young people to share it with. So keep your eyes peeled. You know, hopefully they are making a comeback or coming back. But I've missed them at the big open field there. So that's good.
That's a nice story.
Oh, yeah. I was happy.
Yeah. Nice.
Any more sightings? Laurie.
I think, Victoria, we should mention we saw about 50 Vos swifts this morning down at Colony Farm.
Oh my.
With the group that goes bird counting there twice a week. And it was interesting because we were down there in sort of iffy weather to start off the morning. There was a big dark storm cloud coming our way. And just as it started to rain, we were looking up at the sky and suddenly we saw all these swifts going by. And it was like they were just on the edge of the front and moving off somewhere else. And then we did get rained on a bit, but
yeah,
we hung in there until the sun came out and we had a very good walk today. So
yeah, the swifts weren't going in circles or anything. They knew where they were going. They were all going the same direction, moving away from this rain front that seemed to be coming in. Very interesting. Does anyone want to guess how many bird species we've identified in that one field at Colony Farm in the last 3 months? 3.5 months? Just guess.
130.
Too many.
55.
55? Close. Anyone else?
40.
63.
Wow.
Ooh.
That's a lot of different birds.
Yeah,
Wow.
we are impressed as well. So this is the field just on your right as you come into off the Lougheed. Yeah, we've got 63 bird species using that field. And it's still just, well, it's not even mid-June yet. Things are just starting to heat up. So, yeah.
I've been seeing black swifts flying up above my place recently in the late afternoon, early evening. They are so challenging to try and get a photo of. I get one, but it's just a blur. But I have seen them through the binoculars, and I know they're black swifts. They've got a little bit of white under the wing.
Oh. Victoria, have you fed that information to Metro Van Parks?
We have a meeting with them next week,
Okay.
Brian.
Do you think they'll be excited, stunned? Do you think they'll maybe know of those?
Interested. Yeah, this is information that no one knew before, which is the best kind of information to have. Yeah, it's
maybe
good.
They'll be stunned.
Yeah, maybe.
They shouldn't be, but they may be.
Yeah. I have a wildlife sighting, and that is something extraordinary is happening this year. And that is, I've been here on the coast for 30 years. And in my garden, I usually get 1 or 2 or 3 evening grosbeaks, maybe for an afternoon once in the spring and maybe another afternoon in the fall. And now I have 15 out there, not day in and day out, but every day, all day.
Wow.
And others are reporting them too. So I was talking to a very good birder at Colony Farm this morning, Dave Schutz, who many of you would know. And there's someone, in addition to Susan Lundell, how many did you have before you had to take your feeder down, Susan?
Oh, yeah.
About 12 to 20.
Yeah. Well, there's someone else, a neighbor of Susan's. Dave went out to verify this, and he counted 40 coming to the feeder, but there were another uncountable numbers up in the trees around the feeder. So it's just an extraordinary time that's happening with this species.
What are you feeding them?
Black oil sunflower seeds, and all my neighbors are reporting them coming to their feeders as well. They're beautiful birds, these bright yellow yellow and black with big white spots on them, big beaks. So it's what they call an eruptive, IRR, eruptive year for grosbeaks, but it's never happened before in my experience. So really interesting.
Never got them.
You're not getting them, Liz?
No, I have never seen them.
Well, come over.
I will.
Yeah, come on over. Yeah.
Put the kettle on.
Yeah. Outside.
I believe we can do that now.
Yeah. Anyone who wants to see them, come over. Just send me an email. Let me know when you're coming. So I see it's 8:45. So I think it's time that we wind up here. This will be our last club meeting until September 14th. But we are going to have the show and shares over the summer months. So anyone who's interested in presenting a video or something they've seen or one of their summer activities, just let Ian MacArthur know. Ian's got a conflict on tonight. That's why he's not here with us. And does anyone else have anything they want to say before I close off here?
Good, thank you.
Okay, great.
Very enjoyable.
Yeah, thanks very much, Josh, and thanks to all the photographers for submitting their photos as well. Really, it makes the evening extra special too. And nice to have you here, Scott. I haven't seen you for a while. So very nice. And I saw Natasha was here as well. So, and now we're getting some thanks coming in. So thanks very much. Everyone enjoy the summer. We'll see you in 2 weeks' time at the show and share in June. Okay, good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you, Victoria. Thanks, Brian. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks again, Josh.